Hi everyone, this is our BC First People project, and today we're talking about indigenous land in BC. We refers to Calls to Action number 51. In indigenous society, land is very important. It encompasses culture, relationships, ecosystem, social systems, spirituality, and law. In today's presentation, we'll talk about some current issue about indigenous land and what happened in the past, how indigenous peoples have fought back and have fighting to protecting their land, and what government are doing and what we can do about it.
Current issues about the land. The current issue in the BC Indigenous land issue is that the additions to reserve policy, the ATR, is a very broken system. The ATR is slow and a confusing process without clear rules. It has many problems that need fixing. The Assembly of First Nations, the AFN, is currently fighting back to try and change the system and make it Indigenous-led and much better for the Indigenous people. There are many changes currently underway, but many of them are very slow, have many delays, or are being blocked by government influence.
What happened in the past? In the past, British Columbia did very little to recognize Indigenous land rights. Between 1815 and 1854, Governor James Douglas signed the Douglas Treaties on Vancouver Island, inspired by British treaties models from New Zealand. He created the first reserves and initially offered generous land terms, but was pressured to reduce them. After 1854, BC refused to sign any more treaties, and for over a century, Indigenous land title was ignored. Treaty making resumed in the 1990s to correct historical injustices. Several First Nations, like Tsawwassen and the others, have since signed final agreements. However, many communities are still waiting. A major barrier to the additions to reserves, ATR system, which is meant to expand reserve lands, but it's slow and clear and often causes long delays. Many land claims fall into limbo. Indigenous leaders and Assembly of First Nations are pushing to replace the ATR with an Indigenous-led system, while provincial efforts continue to reform the process.
Historically, First Nations in British Columbia used several strategies to protect their unceded land and rights from the government. Starting in the late 18s, they used politics. Leaders traveled to meet with governments in Victoria, Ottawa, and even London. They also formed large groups like the Allied Tribes of BC to have a stronger, unified voice against unfair policies. They fought against laws meant to erase their culture, like the 1927 rule that banned raising money for land claims. When politics didn't work, they went to court. This led to a landmark Carter case in 1973, which forced Canada to recognize Aboriginal title for the first time. They also used direct action like protests. A famous example is the 1984 Mary's Island blockade, when First Nations physically stopped logging to protect their forests. All these past facts created the foundation for today's fight for Indigenous right and land in BC.
So what are they doing today? Recent actions by Indigenous people regarding land center on asserting rights, protecting ecosystems, and promoting self-determination through initiatives like the Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas and land back movements. These actions often involve collaborations with governments, like the modernization of the land use planning in British Columbia and the establishment of funding mechanism for Indigenous-led conservation. Amnesty International also highlights the ongoing struggle of Indigenous communities to protect their land from environmental threats and the violence faced by environmental defenders.
What is the government doing today? Today, the government's working to better recognize indigenous land rights in BC by modernizing treaties and land policies. Treaties like the Tsawwassen and Taliman agreements give First Nations more control over land and self-government. BC has changed laws to help indigenous people buy land, and there are currently 57 treaties in progress, with efforts to make them more flexible and fair. A key issue is the slow and outdated additions to reserve ATR system, which delays land transfers, some for over a decade. For example, the Ilinia First Nations, despite signing a treaty in 2018, still faces land transfer delays. Minister Murray reckoned its leading reforms to speed up and clarify the process, while the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, is pushing for an indigenous-led system to replace ATR. Progress is being made, but major improvements are still needed.
What can we do? We can help support the ANF in their fight to reform the ATR. You can spread news about their actions. You can vote for politicians that plan to fix Indigenous issues. You can also donate to their cause. These are all important solutions that you can do as a person that can help Indigenous people.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who is listening or watching this video. And please contribute when you can. Starting now is important.